The rain had started somewhere outside Millbrook, and by the time I reached Pine Hollow it had thickened into that slow, patient kind of weather that settles in for the night and refuses to be hurried. The old Exchange building sat at the end of Cooper Street the way I remembered it, narrow-shouldered and stubborn, its brick darkened to the colour of wet tobacco. I let myself in with the key the Historical Society had mailed me, and the smell rose up to meet me like an old friend. Bakelite. Dust warmed by decades of summer attics, a faint sweet trace of the talc the girls used to keep on their wrists so the sweat would not stick to the keys. I stood in the doorway for a long moment and let myself be 20 again. The switchboard waited under a pair of yellowed bedsheets in the main room. I lifted them carefully, folding them the way my mother taught me, and there it was, the long oak face of it, every jack and cord exactly where I had left them in the autumn of 1979. Above it, the round Seth Thomas clock had stopped. The hands rested at 14 minutes past 3. I told myself clocks stop, springs wear out, buildings settle into their own particular silences. But I heard Mrs. Avery's voice anyway, the way I had heard it 100 times on my first week of training. Never plug into line 17 after 3 in the morning, Margaret. Not ever. She had never explained, and I had never asked the way you do not ask certain things when you're 16 and grateful for the work. The rain pressed harder against the windows. I decided to stay. I carried my overnight bag up the narrow stair to the room the operators had once used for naps between shifts, and I set my kettle on the little hot plate in the corner. The cot was still there. The wool blanket smelled faintly of cedar. I told myself I was only delaying the inevitable, and I went back down to the office shelves where the logbooks waited in their long brown row. The handwriting met me like a face in a crowd I almost knew. Doris Pelham's loops, Eleanor Briggs's careful slant, entries about quiet voices on lines that had been disconnected the previous spring, a subscriber on Walnut Street who placed 3 calls on a Tuesday in 1962, though his obituary had run the Saturday before, and again, written across the margins in a red ink that had gone the colour of old blood, the same warning, line 17 after 3, do not answer, do not plug through. I turned a page and my own hand looked back at me. 16-year-old loops, the M in Margaret a little too tall the way I used to make it before I trained myself out of the habit. The entry was dated October 9th, 1979. Call received, line 9, female caller identifying herself as Margaret Halloran, age 62, calling from the Exchange building. Caller advised me not to be alone here. Caller disconnected at 14 minutes past 3. I closed the book very gently, the way you close a door on a sleeping animal. In the kitchenette, the kettle began its thin, rising cry. I poured the water over the leaves and watched my hands shake. Outside, the wind found a new throat in the eaves, and the building exhaled around me, slow and long and almost patient. The tea had gone lukewarm in my hands when the bell rang. It was such a small sound, no louder than a spoon tapping the rim of a cup, and yet it stopped the breath in my throat. I set the cup down on the desk and listened to the building listen back. The bell rang again, soft and tinny, the way I remembered them ringing on slow Sunday afternoons when the whole town seemed to be napping at once. I crossed the floor without deciding to. The switchboard rose in front of me like an old altar, dark except for one jack near the top row where an amber bulb pulsed at the slow rate of a sleeping heart. I did not remember that bulb. I had learned every lamp on this board the way other girls learned hymns, and this one had never been part of the catechism. I told myself there must be a battery somewhere in the cellar, still holding a thread of charge. I told myself a great many things. The headset hung on its hook the way I had left it half a lifetime ago. I lifted it. The leather of the band was cracked, but it settled against my ears as if it had been waiting. For a long moment I heard only the hush inside the wires, that vast, soft ocean. Then a man's voice came through, very close, very patient, whispering my maiden name. He asked if the line was clear. He said he needed to place a long-distance call to 1974. I tore the headset off. The amber light died at once. But when I turned, the operator's chair behind me had swiveled all the way around, and it was facing the board. The chair did not move again while I watched it, but I felt watched in return, and I went for the door the way a fish goes for open water. The knob turned. The door did not. The rain had drunk its fill of the wood, and the frame had closed around it like a soft mouth, and no amount of my shoulder would convince it otherwise. I went back to the desk for my keys. The desk was bare. I had set them on the blotter when I came in. I remembered the small, bright sound of them, the cold of the brass ring against my palm. They were not there now, and the blotter held only the long, shallow dent where they had lain. The logbook lay open beside it, turned to a page I had not turned to. The handwriting was my own. I knew the loop of my G, the tired slant of my T, the way I crossed nothing all the way through. The entry was dated tomorrow. It described, in the calm, clipped language we'd been trained to use, a woman entering the office at 8:15, lifting the headset, accepting a call from an unlisted exchange. The last line read, "Subscriber failed to disconnect, transferred to permanent staff." I tore the page free. I struck a match at the sink and watched my own writing curl and blacken and go to soft grey lace down the drain. The smoke smelled like wet hair. When I turned, the book was open again. The same entry, the ink still wet enough to catch the lamplight. Behind me, one by one, in the slow, patient order of a hymn being remembered, the bells on the board began to ring. The first bell was the third drop on the left, and my hand went to it before my mind did. 40 years of training will move a body the way a tide moves a boat. I seated the plug, lifted the headset and said the words I'd said 10,000 times. "Number, please." A man's voice came through, thin with worry, smelling somehow of hay and diesel. He needed Dr. Lowell out at the Mercer place. The heifer was down and would not rise. I knew him before he gave his name. I had placed that call on a Tuesday in the fall of 1976, and I had stayed on the line long enough to hear the doctor promise he was coming. "Thank you, Margaret," the farmer said, soft as a hand on a shoulder. "I will see you soon." The next bell, a young mother asking for Fort Jackson, her voice bright and breakable. Then a doctor, clipped, requesting the ambulance to a house on Poplar Street where a child's grandfather had fallen. Then a woman who only wanted to hear her sister's voice in Tulsa before the weather turned. Each one I remembered. Each one thanked me by name. Each one said they would see me soon. I knew their faces from the obituary column. I had clipped some of them myself, folded them into the back of the logbook, a small private liturgy of the served and the gone. On the wall above the door, the clock that had been silent since I arrived gave a single dry click, the way a throat clears before speaking. Then another. Then it began to tick in earnest, steady and certain, and the long black hand swept backward across the face. The bells settled like birds at dusk, and in the hush that followed, one drop remained dark and waiting. 17. The brass eye of it caught the lamplight and held it, patient as a coin at the bottom of a well. I knew the rule. I had taught the rule. Never plug 17 after midnight. Not for any voice, not for any reason. I stepped back from the board, and my knees remembered the chair before my mind did, and I made them remember the floor instead. The amber bulb above the cord began to pulse, slow and warm, and I felt my own pulse answer it without permission, the two of them keeping time like dancers who had practiced. In the polished curve of the board's brass plate, my reflection sat where I had been sitting. It had not risen with me. It had not turned. It only watched the lamp with the small, composed smile of a woman waiting to be useful. A footstep in the back hallway, soft as a page turning. I did not have to look. I knew the careful tread, the way the left heel always met the boards a breath later than the right. Eleanor came into the lamplight wearing the rust-coloured cardigan with the pearl buttons, the one she had been mending the morning her hand stopped halfway to her tea. She smiled at me the way she used to smile when a new girl cried at her first wrong connection. "It is all right, Margaret," she said. "The night shift has been short-staffed for such a very long time. You were always meant to come back. That rule about 17, dear, that was never a warning. That was your reservation." The understanding came the way the tide comes to a flat shore, all at once and from every direction. The clock had stopped at 3:14 because that was when I would arrive, not when she had gone. The ledgers were filled in my hand because they had always been mine, every careful column reaching back through years I had not yet lived. The call I had placed from 1974, the voice on the other end of the line warning a younger woman about line 17, had not been a warning at all. It had been a confirmation, a circle finding its own teeth and closing them gently. I smoothed my skirt the way Eleanor had taught me, palm flat from waist to knee, and I sat. The chair received me without complaint. My reflection in the brass plate finally turned its head to meet me, and we agreed about everything. The cord lifted as if it had been waiting all its working life for my hand. I plugged into 17, and the warm hum travelled up my wrist and settled behind my collarbone like a held breath, finally given somewhere to rest. "Good evening," I said. "How may I direct your call?" Beyond the windows the rain stopped between one drop and the next. In the morning the volunteers let themselves in with the Historical Society's brass key and found the sheets settled neatly over the board, the air undisturbed, the new ledger open to a fresh page. The night shift is fully staffed. The entry read in a hand they did not recognise and would later mistake for charm. Subscribers may resume calling at their convenience. The clock above the door read 3:14. In the quiet, a single bell began to ring.